In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up the preferences for your grid, and we'll talk a little bit about the artboards. All right, so for setting up the grid, you want to go to your preferences. I am using a Mac, so I will go to where it says Illustrator CC at the top row of the program. If you are using a PC, then you would go to the word File. On the PC, File will have Preferences as the last one listed in that menu. If you're on the Mac, then under Illustrator CC is where you will find Preferences. And we can go to units first. We want to make sure that we're on inches. It should default that, but if it is not, you can set it up. Those are your options. Inches is the best one. Most likely that's the one you're most familiar with. Although if you're more familiar with centimeters, you're welcome to use those. Leave stroke at points and type at points for now. Over here you can go to Guides and Grid. The grid is something you can have pop up. It's kind of like a graph paper behind you. It's very handy though when we are working in patterns to kind of be like working on a graph paper. It will have a means of measuring right there on the paper in front of us. That's very helpful. It will default to cyan blue. You can change that if you'd like. I recommend to stay away from black. Most likely you will be drawing in the black pen because that's a default. So cyan. Lines is a good one, although there's dots, but lines is probably easier to see. A grid line every 1 inch. So that'll be a heavier line. Subdivisions of 8. You want 8. It might default to 4, but make it 8. You'll notice if you do this, it will be very similar to the graphing ruler that you received in your art kit. And this again helps us, especially in pattern making, break down inches to eighths of an inch, which is very handy. Smart guides. These are little lines that show up as you move your cursor in line or centered with other reference points. So they'll come and go. You can have them turned on or off. I recommend to have them on. It actually helps you kind of align things, and it illuminates objects as you get close to them, especially if they're hidden objects, meaning no stroke, no fill. That way you can see those. Other things here right now, you don't need to change, but you can always come back to your preferences and set them. So we will click OK for that. And let's get our grid on the file page, or as I should call it, the artboard. Up here under View, you can come to View. Rulers is an option. I'll click on it. Rulers, though, only turn on rulers across the top and down the left side here, depending on your zoom factor. I'm zoomed out, so it's showing a mark for every 4 inches because this is a 36-inch page. That is 1 yard. It's about the size of a typical office desk. And this direction is going 24. Again, it is marked by every 4 inches. If I were to zoom in, now notice I got close enough. Now it's breaking it down to every 2 inches, and now it's broken it down to every 1 inch. So those are guides that help, but they're kind of far away if you're working into the artboard. So under View, you can continue to keep your rulers on, or you can decide to hide them. Keep going down the list to where it says Show Grid. Notice on all your menu lists you have the written command, but over here you also have your keyboard shortcut. I do not expect you to memorize every single shortcut in the program. If you do, then you could be a master of Illustrator. But there will be some that I'll always call out as I'm working, just because they are probably the most used and you should get used to those. But over here, Show Grid. And very light, as I zoom in, you may be able to see that it is showing up here. I could go back into my preferences and make this a little bit darker if it's easier for me to see. with that. It also has a heavier line at every 1 inch increment, and every inch then is broke up into 8 markings. Notice if you've got your rulers on, it'll tell you if you're at a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, 3/4, or 1 full inch. But remember, in between each of these would be 1/8, 2/8 is a 1/4 inch, 4/8 is 1/2 an inch, 5/8, 6/8 is 3/4, and then 7/8. So it will really help in your ability to draw on here. Other little features of the grid are being able to snap to the grid. It makes your cursor, if you're drawing with your pen or other shape tools, snap to an intersection of the grid. You can also snap to pixel. I do not use that very often. I will use snap to point. This helps me if I get my cursor close enough to an existing point, it will recognize I want to connect to that point. So these I turn off and on. If there's check mark is next to it, it is turned on. If it is not got a check mark next to it, it is turned off, meaning that if I needed to get my point in between these lines, I could do that. Otherwise, it would snap to an intersection. All right, last little bit in this video I wanted to address is the artboards. So I'm going to zoom out here. On this artboard, if you'll notice, it is 36 by 24. That's we recommend you go to that size to begin with, just because it would accommodate most of your general full-size patterns, but you may need to, depending on the amount of patterns, any fullness you add to them, you might need 2 sheets to be printed off. So let me show you how you create a second artboard. There's a couple ways you can go about doing it. Over here is a tool. You can click, and if I click that, I can click and drag an artboard to the size I need. But in this case, I want to go ahead and keep it the exact same size. So I'm going to come over here to my panels on the right-hand side. And layers is actually the one I'll click on first because it was probably the most recent or most used or default panel title. But in the layers panel, under a different tab, is artboards. And artboards work similar to layers, and I think from your previous class with this, you're familiar with layers. I'll have that in another review demonstration here on another chapter. But artboards, you can name the artboard. Let's say this was going to be your artboard for the bodice. Then you could have an artboard for the skirt, artboard for shorts, something like that, if it's a multiple piece pattern. But down here, the icon for a new one, I can just click that. It creates a second artboard for me. And in this case, it will make the artboard the exact same size. This feature over here, let me just go ahead and show you. If I click on that tool, I can click and drag an artboard as big as I need it to be. So I could make it whatever size I need, which is fine. Artboards are referring to the size of the printing size for that document. You could have drawings off into the margins in that gray area. They just will not print. And I do that a lot of times with maybe some features or titling, labeling to things. Maybe I have it set up here. I switch them out as I print different things. These are larger than your typical home printer, though, being 36 inches by 24 in order to accommodate full-size patterns. We utilize FedEx, Kinko's, or Staples. Office Depot may also offer some printing and copying type of services, but Staples is the one I found locally for us that prints at pretty reasonable pricing for about 2 sheets of 36 by 24. It's about $7, and I can get most all of my pattern pieces on sheets that big. I'll go into some of that a little bit later in this course, but right now just being able to set up and know how to manage your artboards. Let's see this last one that I drew. It's much smaller. I don't need it. I don't want it. As long as it's my highlighted artboard and I don't want it, I can just trash it, just like you do in your layers panel. And then if I click on Artboard 2, it puts it into the center of the screen for me, or Artboard 1. It actually was somewhat in view, but it didn't quite jump right to it. But that way, depending on which one I'm working, this would move back and forth. I can go back to my other layers tab and then continue on with layers. Again, I'll review that in a different lesson. That is what I have for you right now on your grid setup, showing and viewing your grid, and your artboards. You can also, when you are done, you can hide your grid. You have options as well to either print or not print your grid when printing. Most of the time, I think it defaults to not printing. It is only there to aid you in lining up your manipulations. Thank you for watching.